All right, welcome everybody to another session at TMF Weekday 3. This is a special episode, or special session, I should say, because it is the final episode of the State of TMF. If you guys are not aware of the State of TMF, it is a podcast that the Montrium team runs. Donatella and myself co-host the show, and we talk about all things TMF. There are a ton of extra episodes that you may have missed if you're discovering the podcast for the first time. So I'm going to put a little link up here for you guys to head to YouTube and check it out for yourself. Lots of really great topics we've covered, everything from metrics to inspections to storyboarding to notes to file. I mean, pretty much you name it, we've covered it. Previous podcast episodes. Now, today is a somewhat of a special session because not only are we at TMF week, but we're also finishing the end of our season, which is sort of a little sad for us, maybe sad for you. But exciting that we get to cap off the end of the season at this wonderful event where thousands of you are joining us. If you want to interact with us throughout today's session, you can do so through the chat. You can also ask us questions. In contrary to the other sessions that you've perhaps attended at TMF Week this year, you will be able to ask questions throughout the session. So we'll be able to interact directly. We want to make sure that this is an interactive session. So if you have a question, ask it. And of course, if you have a question and you want to ask us live, you can also ask us live. Come on video and audio and ask us directly. Now, the subject of today's discussion, because it's going to be more of a discussion than a presentation, is all to do with what we call Agile TMF. The official title is More Than an Archive, Moving to an Active TMF Management Model. This is something that Donatella and I, as well as many others internally at Montrium, have talked about a lot over the years, but more so in recent months. And we've really started to talk more about this concept of what we call Agile TMF, which is sort of this new mindset for managing TMF that we want to propose to the industry, right? Donatella, welcome. I didn't say hi yet, but welcome.
Thank you, Oliver. And welcome.
We're just going to have an informal chat.
Yeah, indeed.
As we go through this. Perfect. So obviously, now that we're in another episode of the State of TMF, we want to obviously continue to dive into trends and best practices that we've tackled throughout season 1 as well as season 2. For those that aren't aware, my name is Oliver Pierce. I'm the director of growth marketing here at Montrium. Donatella, maybe a quick few words from you.
Yes, my name is Donatella Ballerini, and I'm a head of TMF services in Montrium.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So as I mentioned, today we're going to talk about Agile TMF, moving away from that sort of archivist mindset that some still have today, more towards an active TMF management model, which we call Agile TMF. And we're going to sort of unpack ultimately what the Agile approach is to TMF and how it can help you transform from sort of that passive archive into more of an active tool for managing clinical trial documentation. So let's dive in. There's going to be, spoiler alert, there's going to be some references to Jedi's, Star Wars references. That's mainly Donatella's area of expertise. But if we jump into
yes,
the
not TMF, Star Wars.
No, not TMF. It's just Star Wars. That's the focus of today. Yeah, and we're going to welcome all Star Wars related memes and GIFs in the chat. So let's start with the basics. Donatella, when we talk about Agile TMF, what do we really mean by that from your perspective?
So, big question, probably the main one. And, probably we can conclude the podcast with this answer because it's a very complex answer, I would say, because Agile means a lot of things. It means a lot of stuff. So, it can be, let's say, quite complicated to give you a brief answer to this question, but probably the main one that I can provide you to give you the main meaning of this Agile methodology is that Agile means to break free from the traditional, old, and passive approach to trial master file that want to see the trial master file as a static archive and try to consider the TMF as an active tool that you have to use during your clinical trial to be inspection ready. So basically, I would say that this is the main meaning of Agile methodology. And if we want to do this comparison with Star Wars, like a Jedi master the Force in Star Wars, in our TMF journey, we aim to master the Agile methodology to ensure and support more inspection readiness of our trial master file.
So we're all just training to be Jedis today, and hopefully at the end of today's discussion, we'll be able to move things with our mind, is basically what you're suggesting.
Indeed. Yes.
Okay, great. That's why I'm here. So I want to sort of take us back a few steps, because obviously Agile TMF perhaps is a new term for many, but the concept of active TMF isn't. And I also want to make it clear, we're not trying to just put a new name on something that already exists. There is some clear differences, but I want to take us back to what inspired us, you, Donatella, the team here, to sort of try and move a shift from that traditional TMF mindset to Agile TMF and begin building the components of what that really means. And of course, we'll dig into what it means a little bit later.
Yeah, I think that probably everyone who is in this call and everyone who is attending TMF Week agree that our goal is TMF inspection readiness. Otherwise, we will not be here to hear about people, SME, about TMF requirement and expectations. So we all agree that obviously we want to apply an Agile methodology to be more inspection ready. That is 100%, I think, an agreement between all of us. But I think that when we start to implement an Agile methodology, so a very active and proactive approach to TMF management, probably before doing that, you have to identify and think about the fears around TMF. So what are the fears? What are the bad consequences that can happen to my TMF, to the status of my TMF, if I treat my TMF as a passive repository, as a passive archive? So what are the consequences? And we know that there are lots of consequences: inspection finding, lack of control, lack of oversight. I can stay here for hours to list a lot of bad consequences that can happen if you treat your TMF as a passive repository. So I think that people should start thinking about what are the fears, what are the cost of inaction towards your TMF. And based on that answer, probably you will understand that to apply and implement an Agile methodology will be the best approach, will be the best tool that you have to ensure and support the inspection readiness of your TMF.
And so then, when we think about, obviously we've got that environment where, we want to move away from a passive TMF management model because of all of the reasons that you mentioned. What are some of the things that make up Agile TMF that maybe people can start to call out and say, oh, actually, yeah, I work this way. Yes, we have that, but we don't work in this way yet. If you could sort of, in a nutshell, sort of list off the 3, 4, 5, however many components you feel makes up Agile TMF, just to give everybody a little bit of context. Like, what does Agile TMF mean to you?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say the data-driven approach. So I think that this is the main concept, the main elements of an Agile methodology, which means that we know that usually the TMF is defined and considered as a collection of essential documents, at least for the moment, until the E3 will not coming out and will be effective. So it's a collection of essential documents, and the document contains data, and those data provide information, and information means knowledge. So we can say that the TMF basically is a repository of knowledge. Each single document is a repository of knowledge, and with that knowledge, you can definitely have this more active approach to the TMF, but also to your clinical trial management. So if you start to have this data-driven approach to TMF and not just a passive repository, a passive collection of documents, definitely that will guide your methodology, will guide your TMF management to be more proactive rather than reactive. So you will not wait the issue to be found by an auditor or by an inspector, but you will identify those issues and those gaps in your process before that the finding happen, let's say, and you will have the time to fix them. So data-driven, let's say, is the very first element or principle, I would say. The second one is the process model. So very often the trial master file is managed at the end of the trial, because again, if it is considered a passive repository, a passive archive, just think about, okay, let's file everything in the TMF at the end of the trial, so my story will be there. That is a very, let's say, negative and not helpful approach to your TMF, because your TMF should be embedded into the clinical trial process and start since the beginning. So when the clinical trial is planned, also the planning of the TMF needs to start. And this is another very important element. Third, I would say, last but not least, is the risk-based approach. We've got lots of sessions about risk, another one tomorrow, and lots of panel on risk, because risk-based approach is something that now is really required. It's not just a need, because we don't have unlimited resources and unlimited time. So, but it's also a requirement. So to be able to apply a risk-based approach, it means to have a critical and a proportionate approach to your TMF that really understand what are those critical factors that will impact the quality of my TMF. Not everything have the same weight. Not everything will have the same impact of the patient and on the data integrity. We need to develop a risk-based approach. And that means to be proactive towards your TMF.
So just to run through that again. So the key principles here are being data-driven, embracing a risk-based approach, fostering sort of this collaborative, adaptive mindset within the team, and really making sure that the way that you leverage data can help you better measure and understand things like TMF health, compliance, and ultimately help you make more informed decisions, much like a Jedi uses the Force to figure out the environment that they're
in. Indeed, yeah, indeed. These
that's the one and only Jedi connection I'm going to be able to make today. Carry on.
Yeah, but that one is perfect, because as you said, for example, the risk-based approach is definitely the power of a TMF Jedi to be able to detect the anomaly and the potential issue within the force, within the TMF. So probably if you're a Jedi, you have the power to check each single document of the TMF in 1 second, very probably. But, you have to develop a risk-based approach, so a proportionate approach. And if you are a TMF Jedi, you will be able to understand what are the critical factors, what are the high-risk area, high-risk artifact within your TMF. And as you said, something very important, to have this TMF Jedi mindset, which is something that is lots of, let's say, is the core topic of different discussion during this TMF week, because the importance of having the right culture, having the right knowledge about TMF requirement, TMF expectation from inspector is really crucial to have this TMF Jedi approach to TMF, because otherwise you can fail really in your TMF processes, in your KPI and in your metrics. So it's really important also to have this cross-functional, I would say, mind that is able to understand that the TMF is not just a clinical operation affair, but it's something that will touch a different stakeholder within the company, so within a sponsor, but also outside with CRO, vendor, laboratories, and other stakeholders. And also to be open, to be able to develop open and strong communication between all these different stakeholders, because they need to be aligned on the same expectation, on the same requirement, and understand what is the final goal. And so if you are a TMF Jedi, you can definitely do something like that.
I love how the chat is erupting with Star Wars puns, GIFs, memes, everything under the sun. I hope people are listening and not just getting carried away with that.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to
hopefully both. Hopefully both.
I see something, but I'm trying to concentrate. But yes, definitely.
I love it. It's good. All right. So you touched on something really interesting there, because you talked about metrics, right? And I think metrics is something that everybody talks about, but I think so many people miss on. And I think in a to be able to get meaningful metrics in a TMF environment, you almost have to adopt an agile TMF mindset and manage the TMF in an active way. Because if you don't, it's very, very challenging for you to have anything that's really accurate, right?
Yeah.
When we think about Agile TMF, these metrics have to be adaptive. How do you think about implementing adaptive metrics in an Agile TMF environment? And what are some of the metrics that you might focus on?
Yeah, so very good question, Oliver, because metrics is a very key element of an agile methodology because, as we said, agile means to use the data within your TMF to understand, to do smarter decision, to do more informed decisions. So they are really important. And to do that, you have to measure the health of your TMF. So apply metrics. In terms of metrics, definitely there are lots of metrics that you can implement. I think that the TMF reference model developed a list of metrics for TMF that is around 21, 22 metrics. So I would say quite a long list. But not all the metrics, in my opinion, have the same weight and the same impact on your TMF. And this is why it's important to develop a metrics program. Probably you have already heard this statement, but not there's no one size fits all when it comes to metrics, because you need to identify what are the metrics and so what are the KPI that you want to measure within your TMF. That can be different from another company because that company has a different operational model, different study design, so different approach to the TMF management. So it's really important to understand and assess those metrics. And this can be, let's say, an ongoing exercise, because it doesn't mean that the metrics or the KPI that you establish this year will be the one that you will go on to measure for the next 5 years, especially if you have never managed TMF metrics and KPI. So you can start with some, of them. I suggest definitely the main from completeness, timeliness, and quality, because these are the 3 main principles of TMF compliance. But then you can verify that maybe using those data, you need to focus more on quality, because maybe completeness is quite good, but quality is really suffering from a metric standpoint. So you really need to develop a metrics program that will adapt to the change of the situation, to the change of the environment, to the change of the processes, to change of people. So it's not sufficient to define the metrics. You need also to monitor them, to monitor the result, and then adapt those results to the situation that is changing. Like, risk. TMF Jedi is able to be adaptive. Is an adaptive person because he knows that risk can change, and so metrics can change, and you have to adapt. You can't say, okay, we are going to measure this for the rest of our life. You need to adapt and be flexible because things can change, especially in clinical trial.
I love that. So we've talked about the key principles of ultimately what Agile TMF is. I want to move on to sort of more on the practical implementation side of things, right? So when we think about trying to move towards an Agile TMF process, can you give us some examples of what that might look like? Where would we start in terms of our journey? Is it sort of things like quality checks? Is it oversight? Like where's the best place for us to start?
So my recommendation definitely would be, let's start from quality check, because I think that is a very key element when you want to ensure spatial readiness. Because if you don't know the status of your TMF, how can you be sure or anyway be aware about the finding of potential issue in your TMF? So definitely you need to do oversight, you need to do control. And so quality check, I would say, is the best tool, is the best answer. Say that quality check means a lot of stuff. And I think that I will give you a practical example, probably because it's less, let's say, theoretical and more practical to understand. So let's start with a monitoring visit report, a very common document. Probably everyone know a monitoring visit report. The very first level of QC to be performed on this document is a document QC to verify the ALCOA principle compliance, the good documentation practice compliance of this document. So if it is readable, signed, complete, all their core principle and good documentation practice. Once you have defined that, yes, this is a good document, you move on to next step of QC. So you're going to verify what I call a cross-check QC. You're going to verify the links of that document with other documents, because we know that we can consider the TMF as a puzzle, and each document is a piece of this puzzle. And so very often they are linked to each other. And so you're going to verify if there is a confirmation letter plus a follow-up letter for that monitoring visit. And this is a cross-check. But then you don't stop there. You go on. You move on to a third level, I would say, where you verify, you have a more holistic approach, let's say, of this document and its relationship, and you verify the completeness and the compliance with the monitoring plan. So you are going to verify if, for example, there are all the monitoring visit report according to what is contained in the monitoring plan, if it has been filed according to the monitoring visit plan. So you're going to verify a more holistic approach based on the process. And last but not least, I would say level of QC will be a very global inspection readiness status, so that is composed by the different elements. So you will understand that if from an inspection point of view, that part of the TMF is inspection ready, or there can be potential GCP inspection finding. And in that case, you will identify and you will establish those lists to verify corrective and preventive action, try to be ready in case of an inspection. So it's a multi-level QC, I would say, the more practical example that I can give you.
And how regular you would do that is a great question here from Barbara that's related to metrics, but I think connected also to perhaps something that you're mentioning here around sort of how often do you recommend we review or measure the metrics and or ultimately the results of these cross checks.
So I can give you some best practice or recommendation, but again, it's something that you need to define based on your maturity level, based on different variables that you are in. I would suggest definitely at least on a quarterly basis, but sometimes it can be even often, especially when a clinical trial is a strategic one and you want to be really sure, because maybe you are quite sure that TMF will be inspected, or maybe because it's a new molecule or something very particular, again, strategical for the company. So there are lots of elements, like in a risk-based approach, that you need to consider to understand if it is something that you need to do on a very frequent, regular basis, or maybe, every 6 months. I definitely not on a yearly basis because it's too late. But yes, maybe you can go from 1 month till 6 months. Can be something, let's say, acceptable. But again, it depends if it is an interventional trial, low risk, high risk. So lots of variables to be taken into consideration.
Amazing. Hopefully that answers your question, Barbara, and if anybody else was thinking there. If we moved on, there's some questions here around sort of the impact of an agile approach, which I think may be a good sort of place to stop here. So Pallavi, hopefully I'm presenting that name correctly, asked, how would you recommend using an agile approach to improve timeliness?
Yes, absolutely. So in this case, I think that agile methodology means, first of all, to have timeliness metrics. So if you have data around timeliness that show that the timeliness principle is not going well, so definitely agile methodology will be something that you can use to understand, first of all, the root cause of that issue. So to understand why timeliness is not going well, is not in compliance. Maybe because your process is not robust, maybe because your SOP is not written in the right way, because maybe the time frame that you have defined in your SOP is not efficient, or simply doesn't work. It's something theoretical, but it doesn't match with the reality of everyday activities and everyday life. So the agile methodology will help you to do an assessment of what the current situation is based on the data acquired through the timeliness metrics. And that will mean to be proactive. So have those data of timeliness metrics to define a better strategy to improve the process of your TMF management.
Love that. So really diving into leveraging the agile mindset that we have to review perhaps where there might be issues in timeliness, and specifically where they are in the process, right? Is it a specific functional area, or is it the overall process itself? And then as an output, be able to evaluate how you can better integrate the TMF filing process, let's call it, into the overall maybe clinical trial process itself. That's sort of the general recommendation.
Yeah, indeed.
All right, another question here, which is also related to sort of implementation of the agile approach, which is from Valerie, which is how would you recommend assessing a current TMF process and identifying where to allow a more agile approach? And I guess this also stems sort of from a larger question, which is, should we be looking at our overarching TMF process from start to finish and then moving the entire thing into sort of an agile methodology, or should we be selecting low-hanging fruit sort of parts of our process to modernize and move towards agile piece by piece?
So very, very good question, definitely, Valerie. Thank you for asking, because it's something that sometimes is under-evaluated, but on the contrary, I think that is the very first step where you need to start if you want to implement an agile methodology. And the very first step is do an assessment of your TMF process in its holistic, global, let's say, way, because a step can be missing, a step can be redundant, or maybe you didn't cover a specific aspect of a process. So the very initial big picture of your TMF process is essential to understand, okay, where are you with this process? What are the steps that you are covering? And you will have already an initial visualization on what is missing. It's very important in this part, I would say, is to define flow chart and visualization of the process, not something written that sometimes is not even easy to follow as a process. So something visually to understand what are the steps of the process, what is missing, what is not covered, what is not fully covered, and what can be a potential GCP finding in case of inspection. And then based on the result of this assessment, you can, as Oliver said, maybe focus on a specific zone, because we are talking about a very big and complex process. There is, as I told before, the TMF life cycle starts in the beginning. We've got the trial TMF setup planning, we've got the conduct and the management of the TMF, and the TMF closeout. So these are the three main big stages of the TMF management as a clinical trial management. And in these stages, there are lots of steps, lots of processes. And you can, if you have lots of, let's say, gaps, you can't focus on every gap. So you need to prioritize maybe the setup and the planning, because you're going to start a new trial next month. So you want to make sure that particular stages of the TMF is effective and is robust enough. And then you can move on to the other stages and to the other step. So it's a step-by-step, I would say, project, because as I heard in these days, and as I like to define, TMF is a journey. And so you can't expect to, make a revolution of your TMF processes in one day, but start to do an assessment and verify where are the gaps, the area that you need to improve, or maybe that you really need to cover, because maybe you didn't, think about that. Like, for example, audit trail review. Maybe you don't have an SOP or working instruction to define how to perform audit trail review. So all these kind of aspects need to be considered in a very initial and robust assessment.
Amazing. Now, I want to take us back to something that we talked about earlier. When you started explaining the key principles of Agile TMF, you talked about being data-driven. And I think data-driven is sort of something that people throw around a lot. When you think about Agile TMF and data-driven approach within the TMF, what types of data are you typically referring to here? Do you have some sort of examples of what you might look at to be more data-driven?
So I think that one of the biggest mistake, or let's say common mistake that people do, is that they think that Data in TMF are only in zone 10, data management. Obviously, it's called data management. But if you are a TMF Jedi, this is the power of TMF Jedi. You see data across the entire TMF, across any zone of the TMF. And if you think about that, it means that there are really, data around protocol deviation, about compliance with TMF principle. There are data about monitoring, data about serious adverse events. I mean, it's really a source of a lot of data, different data. And if you have this ability, like a TMF Jedi, to see those data and not to consider it just like a passive and dead repository, definitely you will get that power. You will get that agile power to understand that you can do better some processes, that you can do better and informed decision because you are aware about a regulatory submission approved, a site that was activated, or something that was missing in a site from an IP perspective. So you really have this source of powerful data in your hands.
I want to talk about, because when we think about data, sort of an assumption here with data is that we have tools to be able to capture the data, right? And so when we think about an Agile TMF, what are some of the tools that we feel are absolutely essential for us to be able to move towards an Agile TMF approach? And is it possible without tools? Is it possible in a sort of paper-based or file share, everything stored on SharePoint sort of environment? Or do we need some more sophisticated technology to be able to leverage these types of concepts?
So, very complex question, Oliver. I will answer, let's say, in 2 points. The first point you mentioned is about technology. In the recent conference of CDISC, of TMF, CDISC TMF Interchange in Berlin, there was a presentation from an inspector, and he was the very first one saying that a system must be used for its purpose. So the system must fit the purpose. So the very first thing that I will answer you is use a system that is fitting for the purpose. This is a requirement, this is an expectation from regulatory authority, because otherwise, even if you find a workaround to use other system, you will very probably have issue and problems if an inspector comes. And this is the first question. In terms of tools, there are different tools that are, in my opinion, are very important. And probably I heard them also in previous session of this TMF week, like, for example, TMF Plan, which is something very relevant, even if you're using a paper TMF, because it's a document where really you establish expectation, roles, and responsibility in terms of TMF management, especially if there are lots of stakeholders, maybe also, CRO, vendors, maybe different stakeholders, and you establish the rules, basically, of the game. TMF index, well, you can't, understand what is missing if you don't know what to expect in the TMF. And the TMF index or map, or call with all the nice names that people can call it, basically is really the guidance that tells you at this stage of the trial, you have to expect this document, because otherwise there would be a big hole in your TMF. So these are tools that you can use also with paper TMF. Say that, obviously, if you're using a paper TMF, there will be challenging in measuring metrics. Theoretically, you can, and again, if you are a TMF Jedi, probably you can measure metrics on thousands and thousands of paper documents. You can understand the completeness and timeliness and the quality because you are TMF Jedi. But in reality, I think that you really need a tool, a system that can really provide you with the metrics, with the data, and so calculation that you can then verify, analyze, and you can use to define a strategy.
I'm trying to think of sort of a lead-off point here, because I think when you think about sort of this mindset of an agile TMF management approach, there are obviously things that you could piecemeal together to make it work. Trackers here, systems here for managing different things, but ultimately it comes down to how easy it is for you to be able to construct it all together. And ultimately,
Yeah.
most of the leading eTMF systems are engineered to be able to support an agile TMF management approach. And ultimately, it's the key to the city when we think about those types of things. So thanks for giving us that context. So I'm just looking at time here, and I want to be kind of cognizant of how much we have left in our discussion. But we've talked throughout, I think, a little bit about the benefits of adopting a TMF management approach. But I'm curious to understand, obviously, we've gone through this process with existing customers. What are some of the things that you've seen in the real world as examples of sort of the end result of implementing an Agile TMF? What does the environment look like after implementing an Agile TMF management approach within an organization?
So I think that the most relevant example that I can bring you is one about a company that were very confident about the health status of the TMF. And they just came to us asking for an inspection readiness check of the TMF. We explained the methodology, the purpose, and they did honestly more for validate their process rather than for receiving some issue and finding. In fact, when the outcome of our check was your TMF, sorry, is not inspection ready, they were so surprised about that result because they were so confident about the good status, good health of the TMF. And so that was like a sort of light that we bring to them to understand, look, your process is not working in the right way or is not working as you were expecting to work. So probably you need to fix some QC step, or maybe there is something that you're not covering, maybe you need to verify milestone and other parameters of your QC because it's not working, because the outcome is not good. And so that was really, let's say, powerful because you it's different than receiving the calling for help from company that already know, my TMF is not inspection ready, but I don't know how to fix it. And so, you go there and you do the assessment, you do this QC, and you help them to understand where to focus time and resources. Very much powerful when you think, oh yes, look, the reality is quite different from your so from what you were thinking. And this was an example. The other one was about culture, TMF culture, and change mindset towards TMF, because we move with a company where, again, TMF was not considered in any department. I would say just a little bit in clinical operation, but all the other departments, regulatory affairs, clinical trial supply, pharmacovigilance, really not aware about what are the expectations or what are the principles and requirements for TMF. And we started with training and workshop to better to involve and develop also TMF culture and knowledge within the entire company, not only in clinical developments. And after 1 year, this, let's say, implementation of culture and knowledge bring to implement new resources in the staff dedicated to TMF, because they really understand that or you give more responsibility to people already, in the company, the resources, the team, or you need to bring on new resources to manage some specific TMF responsibilities or some specific TMF role. So this was really, let's say, a shift in the mindset, because they started to understand we need people, we need resources to manage TMF. It's not something that will be built for a magician, for a magical power at the end of the trial.
So now if we think about the way that organizations might look to implement this, we have a question here from Kin that I want to throw up. So the question is, how would you transition from passive to active when dealing with different studies? So if we've got old, recently authorized, and future, is there sort of a step-by-step approach, or are we doing everything at once? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear your take on this.
Yeah, Oliver, I know that you know the answer, definitely. But yes, no, it's a step-by-step approach. And I think that in a case, in a scenario so variable and so complex like that one, that you have the striking, I think it's very helpful also to implement a maturity assessment to understand exactly the status, the initial status of the company, of the organization, because to implement an agile methodology means really lots of stuff. I go back to my previous answer. It's risk-based approach, it's data-driven, it's process model, means a lot of stuff. And you can't implement everything in one day or in 1 year. You need to implement a very specific strategy, and that strategy must be unique to your company, to your organization. And to be unique and to be effective, you need to understand the starting point. So where I'm starting in a company with no culture of TMF, with no system, with no processes, or maybe just one SOP. So all these kind of question and assessment must be done before defining the better and most effective strategy to move on and to move to an agile methodology. But definitely is not one jump. It's a step-by-step approach.
And a question I have as a follow-on to that is more related to, like, when we think about taking a step-by-step approach, what are some of the challenges that some organizations might come up against, right? Like, are there going to be folks that are perhaps resistant to change? Are there, the kind of classic, we've always worked this way? Like, what are some of the things that you've seen as organizational challenges in transitioning to more of an agile TMF approach?
Yes, Oliver, I think that this is the main really elements that cause challenges in this shift to agile methodology is the mindset. So this lack of awareness, lack of knowledge in different people that very often are the main stakeholders of a project like that. And so you really need to start from education. Yesterday there was this fantastic panel on awards school, I would say, and the point is that one. I think that who works in TMF environment face the same challenge about having people that cares a lot about TMF. They know the relevance, the importance, the bad consequences of not having an inspection ready TMF, and so they are great TMFers. And the rest of the world is really people that don't understand the relevance. And sometimes those people really need to understand and get educated on that relevance to make the strategic decision to move on to a better process and a more agile methodology. So I think that everything starts from awareness, first of all, so make them aware, educate them, so training, and develop TMF knowledge. These three, let's say, steps.
Amazing. I have so many more questions that we didn't get to, but that was probably what was going to happen, right? We were just going to get carried away with chatting about Agile TMF. Hopefully, Donatella, you're able to stick around a little longer and head to the lounge. If others have questions, perhaps they can ask those directly to you there. Donatella, this has been, as always, a really, really fun discussion and topic. And yeah, I'll see you guys on the next one.
And awake your TMF Jedi, please. Bye.
There you go. She got it in at the end. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you guys in the next session in 15 and in the lounge if you're heading there.